welcome back to Shaboom, the podcast for and about baby boomers. I'm Rick K. Jones, your host, captain, navigator, chief bottle washer, whatever you want me to be. You know, baby boomers, we all lived in an era of modern marketing communications. And many of these communications actually changed not only our country, but the world. During our childhood and adolescent periods, radio was still a very vibrant medium. Everyone drove cars. Everyone listened to music or listened to sports broadcast or listened to the news on the radio. Radio was really essential for college sports. Did y'all know that until 1980, when the University of Georgia and the University of Oklahoma sued the NCAA for antitrust violation, before 1980, we only had one football game a week on television. One a week. Can you imagine that? How many we have today? One a week. And the reason the NCAA restricted college football was they felt like if they had games on TV, nobody would come to the games. That sounds pretty silly, doesn't it? Actually, the fact that TV promoted the games drove attendance even bigger than that. But it was the same for other sports. Many sporting events were not on television. They were on the radio. So you would listen to the radio for, you know, the World Series or NFL championships or some of that kind of stuff. In my early generation, print was still big. Magazines were huge. Life magazine, Time magazine. I'd read Sports Illustrated, wore it out, cover to cover, had a great circulation. A lot of high rates to be advertisers in those publications. Local newspapers were big. They were lots of ads in them. And then along came USA Today. We had the first national newspaper, and it was big, and it was everywhere. It was ubiquitous. Had 4 sections: news, arts, sports, and business. And so we had that. But no medium, burst on the scene like television did. I mean, television came out first late 1940s, early 50s, and then exploded. I remember when we got our first color television, how big that was. Before that, we were watching black and white TV while all of our neighbors and friends had color televisions. All of this marketing communication led to a very creative boom in advertising, public relations, promotion, and it helped grow the industry that I spent my career in, sponsorship and event marketing. We all watched, I think most of us watched Mad Men about that era of advertising executives and what went on during that era. How many of you remember soap operas? Why were they called soap operas? My grandmother called them the stories. They were not soap operas. They were the stories. Well, women were staying home and were not working, and the soap manufacturing companies like Procter & Gamble produced these shows, actually funded these shows, and hence they were called soap operas. Bill Bernbach came along at a time, BBDO, and created amazing advertising for Volkswagen. Remember the Volkswagen Beetle, the Think Small. And one of them was he took a full-page print ad in the newspapers, and in a teeny little piece said Think Small with a small Volkswagen bug on it. I mean, really an interesting time period. Our buddy Bob Heisner, who was on the show recently, he worked at a great agency called Amorati and Puris, and they had some big clients. They wrote what is still the tagline used by BMW, the ultimate driving machine. Later on, BMW came out with a convertible for the first time. And you know what the tagline was? The ultimate tanning machine. Isn't that perfect? But they wrote a tagline for Club Med. Club Med was a client. And at that era, Club Med, French company, had these unique resorts around the world that were very hippie-ish like, and, on the beach and camping and all this. Their tagline was Club Med, the anecdote for civilization. I love that tagline. So here's a song on our playlist today that's all about that era. It's Jimmy Buffett's Pencil Thin Mustache. Communications really did change behaviors Let's start with political communications. I was a first grader when Jack Kennedy ran for president against Richard Nixon, 1960. There was a very popular song at the time by Frank Sinatra called High Hopes. So once there was a rubber tree plant, the ant tried to move the rubber tree plant. He had high hopes. Well, Sinatra rewrote the song for Jack Kennedy, and it was called Back Jack, and it was to the tune of High Hopes. And, of course, Jack Kennedy got elected in a very narrow election, beat Richard Nixon. Now, the irony is this. Later on, Jack Kennedy was coming to Palm Springs, California, where Frank Sinatra had a house. And Frank invited Frank Sinatra to stay at his house. Well, during that era, we had the issues in Cuba. And it was really an issue of the mob being frustrated that Castro had taken over Cuba. And Kennedy tried to take Cuba back with the Bay of Pigs invasion that many of you may remember, and it didn't work. But then instead of backing the mob, Bobby Kennedy, the Attorney General, started investigating the mob. Well, Sinatra supposedly had mob ties. So Jack Kennedy was going to Palm Springs. He was going to land by helicopter. Frank Sinatra built a helicopter pad in his backyard so the president could land, spend the weekend with Frank, but Frank did not come to Frank's house. He stayed at Bing Crosby's house. And it made Frank mad because, as Frank said, hell, Bing's a Republican. And yet that's the Frank Sinatra Back Jack story. And later, Sinatra became a staunch Republican and was a big supporter of Ronald Reagan. The next election after Kennedy had been assassinated, and the one I really remembered as a child, was the 1964 presidential election when Lyndon Johnson, who had become president when John Kennedy was assassinated, ran against Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater was a very conservative Arizonan Republican, and they put out a famous television spot called Daisy. And they were painting Barry Goldwater as someone that would get us into World War III, someone that would get us in a nuclear war. And Daisy was a commercial where a little girl is picking daisies in the meadow, and then you see the atomic bomb go off. Lyndon Johnson won that election in a rout. Later, when Ronald Reagan ran for re-election, he got a great ad man named Hal Riney. Hal Riney and Associates was the consummate California cool ad agency. They did all of Gallo's work, the Gallo Wine Company. One of their ads was Gallo Wines, we will sell no wine before it's time. And I want to say that the voiceover to that was one of the actors. Oh, God, I can't now. I'm having one of those senior moments. Citizen Kane, Orson Welles. Orson Welles did the voiceover for Gallo for We Will Sell No Wine Before It's Time. They also produced a commercial for bad wine. Gallo would take all the bad wine and make wine coolers. And they created a character called Bartles and Janes, two farmers from Napa that grew grapes and sat on a porch, and they did the Bartles and Janes commercial. Well, for Ronald Reagan, they did an amazing series of ads called Morning in America. And basically it was, you saw the sprinkler on the lawn, you saw the American flag, you saw the city up on the hill, and the tagline said, it's morning again in America. Because Reagan's first term had been so successful for our prosperity after Jimmy Carter and after all the inflation. And, of course, as y'all know, the story, Reagan won 49 of the 50 states. He won 49 of the 50 states. The only state he lost was Walter Mondale's state, who he ran against, which was Minnesota. And there's a legendary story that a week before the election, Reagan knew he was going to win in a landslide. And his staff said, let's go spend the week in Minnesota and win that too. And Ronald Reagan said, let's give the man some dignity. Let's don't go to Minnesota. How about that? How about dignity in the White House? Wow, that would be something. Later, Bill Clinton ran for president. He ran against George Herbert Walker Bush. I'm not sure he would have been elected, to be honest with you, had Ross Perot not run as a third-party independent. Ross was mad at George Bush because George Bush had said famously, read my lips, no new taxes, and then, unfortunately, allowed a new tax bill to be passed. And Ross was mad, and a lot of conservatives were mad, and so he ended up getting, I want to say, 19% of the vote that would have gone to George H.W. Bush, but instead went to Bill Clinton. But Clinton ran a campaign about being the first baby boomer president, which he was. And his tagline, his theme song was the classic Fleetwood Mac song, Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow. And we have that song today on our playlist. Causes used commercials in a big way. Remember Smokey the Bear? Only you can prevent forest fires. Or the owl that said, give a hoot, don't pollute. And so the Ad Council produced some amazing commercials that I think changed a lot of our behaviors. And then probably the greatest product ad ever only ran once. Can you believe that? Can you believe you would produce an ad for millions and millions of dollars and only run it once? This was the ad for Macintosh, the new Apple computer, and it was called 1984. And that ad ran one time in the Super Bowl. It was a famous ad. If you remember the parody of 1984, 1984 was written by George Orwell, where he basically said that we were all going to be taken over by the government. Big Brother was going to run our lives. Well, who was Big Brother to Apple? IBM. And so they made it look like IBM was Big Brother and you were forced to use IBM computers. And here was this revolutionary freedom-finding computer called the Macintosh. If you have a chance to Google it, go Google 1984 Apple Macintosh ad. It's still a brilliant ad, but it only ran once. The question today is whether our marketing communications can still change behaviors. Can we still change behaviors and mobilize people? See, the problem is in my generation, there were only 3 TV channels. So you could reach almost the whole country with ads on 3 channels. Now we've got so many choices. We have such broad reach. We now have social media. I have a podcast. How many other people have a podcast? How do you break through the clutter? How do you get your message out there? You know, in the old days, the simpler days, the phrase was, if a tree falls in the woods and nobody heard it, did it make any noise? The new model says, if a billion trees can all fall at the same time, and we can see them all fall on digital or social media, how does your tree stand out? And that is it. So we're going to talk to our special guest today, Lord Matthew Scheckner, about that question. Can advertising and communications today in 2025 make a difference? My special guest today is my dear old friend, Lord Matthew Scheckner, who is a legend in the entertainment and sports business. We'll talk a little bit about Matt's career and what he's doing now. Another baby boomer doing great things late in his career. Let's welcome Matt to Shaboom. Hey, buddy, welcome to the show.
Great to see you, Rick.
It's great to have you here today. Here's a question for you today. You started Advertising Week. Is communication working as well as it used to? Are we changing lives through marketing communication?
Great question. Well, the answer in terms of speed and let's call it instant connectivity, the answer, of course, is yes. But I would say overall, I'll say no, Rick. I think, the world is different, right? You used to wait for the mail, or you would send a fax, and this stuff was not that long ago, well within our work lifetimes. So what's different is the immediacy, whether it's, that always on 24-hour, whether you're getting a message. And to me, it's all the same ultimately, via email, via text, via Instagram message, via LinkedIn message. There were so many direct, let's call it a Sanka, instant coffee way to connect with people today. So from a technical pipes direct vantage point, the answer to your question is yes. But in this battle for attention and focus and follow up and follow through, I think at best it's neutral and maybe a little bit worse because of that information overload, and retention, I think, has suffered.
When you started Advertising Week, it was to celebrate an industry. But one of the interesting things that you did was you celebrated some of the great campaigns. And one way you did it was some of the great advertising characters,
Yep.
that were out there as a living, breathing example of the creative process. Talk a little bit about what went into that.
Well, when we started New York, we started working on it just after the turn of the century, and really 2002 in earnest. And the first one was September of 2004. Just to set the landscape there, Facebook was launched on the Harvard campus as the Facebook in 2005. The iPhone was 2006. YouTube was 2007. No one was talking about, data, programmatic buying of media, artificial intelligence, which is the latest flavor of the month, which will be here for a while. That's not going to go away. And we've seen lots of things come and go. Augmented reality has come and gone and returned in different ways a few times. 3D came, didn't work, went away completely. The icons, as we call them, the great characters, which we kicked off all of Advertising Week in our first year with literally a parade through Times Square, which to me is sort of the ultimate stage, really celebrate the enduring nature of a great campaign. If you look back in history right up to present day, what differentiates things, for all of us? I think it's longevity and the ability to endure, to break through the clutter, to resonate with from one generation to the next. So that's why we chose to celebrate the great icons. We also did the great slogans, not as sexy, but equally important in a different way. And I think that was a good call way back when.
One of my favorite slogans of all time still is in use today by BMW. BMW makes cars in my state, in Spartanburg, and Marty Puris, Ammirati and Puris, Ralph Ammirati and Martin Puris, Martin wrote the tagline, "The ultimate driving machine."
Yep.
They still use that. They only deviated one time from that. When they came out with a convertible, they changed the tagline to "the ultimate tanning machine."
Right.
Which I thought was
you're allowed to rip off your own work.
Exactly, which I thought was really great. I'm not so sure, and maybe I don't want to come off as a fossil, as this baby boomer fossil, but I haven't seen taglines as good as maybe the ones that came out of the 60s, 70s, and 80s today.
Well, we're in an interesting time on the creative side and the media side and the agency business. In effect, digital overall and Google and Facebook, or Meta in particular, are really eating everybody's lunch. And so much of the money is now swallowed by that genre and those two particular companies in particular, which really over-index on share globally. So what we've seen is the craft of creative is really under siege. And you've seen, as the business has evolved, a real almost disappearance, Rick, of a lot of the iconic characters who were so instrumental in creating many of those great slogans that you referred to, the great icons and the great campaigns. So what we're seeing is sort of an ice cream parlor that once had 32 flavors. Let's use that Baskin-Robbins number. I think that was 32. Now go to sort of just vanilla or chocolate. And there's a sameness to a lot of the work. I don't think it's disappeared completely. I think there is still great people doing creative work. I think the Dove campaign, there's a lot of stuff that is really, really clever that's contemporary. So I don't bang the gavel with a death knell on great creative campaigns. But I do think that the agency business, certainly the big holding companies, under siege as businesses, good time to be an independent, and lots of great independent agencies coming up with great creative, really clever deployments of different genres of media. But I think like many things, Rick, things aren't what they once were.
It used to be the classic partnership between a writer and an art director. It's almost like the art of the art director has gone away.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and an industry that's very much, in transition. There are enormous resources on the creative side and the media side now going into technology. You cannot have a conversation about this with anybody in the business without, the words generative AI coming into play. So I think we're, still early days on a transition, but I think a lot of the jobs, a lot of the traditional structures on the creative side in particular are very much, under siege or at risk. And I think the way that media is bought and sold will continue to be driven by technology. And, I think a lot of jobs are going to disappear. As always, others will emerge. But I do think a lot of the traditional structures and infrastructures that we've seen, the big holding company shops in particular, are very much under siege.
Well, you've had an interesting career. I mean, you've worked quasi in government with the New York Sports Commission. You've worked in the events business. You've had your own agency that's done a number of things. You've created one of the most iconic events in America with the 4th of July hot dog eating competition at Coney Island, which continues to just blow people away. I still don't know how he eats that many hot dogs.
No one does, Rick, and don't try.
I mean, I'm reminded of the great Louis Grizzard line, "Remember, chili dogs only bark at night." I just don't know what he feels like after he's eaten all
it's dicey territory to say the least.
I was going to say, but as a baby boomer, you're looking around and you're thinking, I got one more in me. There's still, and I think one of the messages of Shaboom to our generation is, if you're still feel a pulse, you still can make a difference. And I often talk about the need to take advantage of the success we've had and trade it for significance. And, what I love about Advertising Week and the things that you did there was it elevated the industry, but it also became a platform for best practices. It became a platform for others in the industry to get to know others. So in a funny kind of way, it became a gigantic job fair because you had a chance to interact and say, that I like that smart person. I'd love to work for that smart person on a global basis. But you did something interesting in Boston last year where you focused on climate and climate change. Talk a little bit about that project.
Well, I've long believed that the model that we developed for Advertising Week, thought leadership on the business of the business by day and show business at night, I have long believed that could work in other industry verticals. And we had an opportunity that came to us through an old friend of mine from the advertising business. He started Tribal DDB, a great digital agency way back when, and left the industry. He's now a partner at Bain Capital. and a partner of his at that time was the Secretary of Economic Development for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Boston is to climate change and technology what Hollywood is to film and television production. It is a capital, but unlike the reputation of Hollywood, which of course is worldwide, no one really thinks of Boston for that. And it was on that basis or that impetus that we were asked to create what became Climatech, and did it sort of our way. The thought leadership program was at MGM Arena at Fenway and House of Blues. The 2 evening events, opening night was at Fenway Park, hosted by the governor and the mayor. The second night was at the JFK Presidential Library. We had a conversation with Philippe Cousteau, who's Jacques' grandson, and very much a keeper of the Cousteau flame on the importance of protecting and nurturing our oceans. And we actually found a wonderful picture, Rick, you would have loved this, the sentimentality of it, of President Kennedy with Jacques Cousteau many, many, many years ago. So the event was very successful. It's an important area, irrespective of what happens in Washington today, and a re-embrace, if you will, of the past in terms of where our energy comes from. The future and renewable energy, these are big, big businesses, and they will continue to go and grow, and it'll continue to be an important thing. So it was a good exercise for me in sort of testing what I've long believed, that the model could work in other verticals.
You were talking about, where we are politically. I like to remind people that the reason Ted Turner created the Goodwill Games was because we had boycotted the Moscow Olympics, and the Russians boycotted the '84 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles. And Ted, being a global communication guru, realized we got to fix things. And his vision for the Goodwill Games was, can we celebrate the commonalities of us as human beings and not the differences? Mm-hmm. And I had a chance to work on the games. You had a chance to work on the games. Talk about why that was important then, and maybe why it would be important to have something like that today.
Yeah, another good topic. So going back a little further, just to really paint the full picture, it had been all the way back to 1976 and the Montreal Summer Games between what was then called East-West competition. And it wasn't just Russia then, it was the whole Soviet bloc of nations. So East Germany, on and on and on. And none of them came to LA as payback for us under President Carter not going to the Moscow Games in 1980, as you said, ironically protesting the Soviet Union invasion of Afghanistan, who ended up there years later.
Yeah, which really shows that God does have a sense of humor.
Yeah, and our guys being shot by old Kalashnikov rifles, that were left there, because all of us share something that when we leave a boatload of military hardware behind.
Right.
So when Ted Turner created the Goodwill Games, the first one being 1986 in Moscow, then 1990 in Seattle, 1994 in St. Petersburg, and I wrote the bid for New York that won for 1998. From 76 to 86, it had been a full 10 years in between East-West Olympic caliber competition. And the Goodwill Games, as you know quite well, featured all the same athletes that would compete in the Olympics. They added a few winter sports, so it was mostly summer-centric, but added figure skating and a few other winter sports. And it was a finals-only format. So when we had the men or women's, 100-meter dash, it was the 8 fastest men or women in the world, and that was the whole thing. Yeah. 16 days, opening ceremony, really mirrored the games. And I do think your notion of bringing the world together, sports, when it works, brings us all together and allows us for a moment of sanity, a moment of tranquility, a moment of unity. And in a world now, not just a country, but in a world where we are more divided than ever, and I think digital media is a complicit player in that division, something like that would be most welcome. Like most things, Turner really, that should still be going in my mind. And the raison d'etre after the fall of the Soviet Union under, Gorbachev and then Yeltsin, of course, now it's gone back quite a bit the other way. But the raison d'etre was to go to places in the world that were continued, to have challenges. And that would have been a reason to keep it going. Instead, they brought it to, I think it was Brisbane, as a way to get, tickets so some of those folks who we both know could be big shots at the Sydney games and walk around, with the right passes and the right blue blazers. And they really bungled it and wrecked it. So that's a shame that it's gone. But it was a glorious ride. And all credit to Ted Turner.
Yeah, I've said to people that Ronald Reagan gets a tremendous amount of credit, as he should have, for the fall of the Iron Curtain, but Ted Turner should get equally the same amount because you couldn't keep the information out. I had a chance a few years ago to go to Cuba. Mm-hmm. And, number one, I love the Cuban people.
Yep.
They are just warm and passionate and so full of life with so little to show for it. I mean, because clearly socialism has not worked for them. But what was interesting was you can't keep the information out now.
Yeah.
And so they realized that 90 miles away in Miami, it is better.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think I'd like to go there. And so that's what happened, I think, with Ted. It's interesting about how visionaries can change the world. And you had a chance to work with some unique visionaries early on in the advertising world. Talk about a few of those that you had a chance to work with. Some of them have retired, some of them have passed on, but talk about one or two of the people that you work with that you were really kind of blown away with their view of the world.
One who's still around, he's in his 90s now, is Keith Reinhardt. Keith was one of the founders of Omnicom and was a disciple of the great Bill Bernbach. And Keith, genuinely loves the business. And one of the many things I learned from him and admire about him, we brought him around to speak in Tokyo. We brought him to Mexico City, and he was well into his 80s at that point. And Keith would not only do his thing on stage and do it brilliantly, but he would listen to others speak and take notes. And you're talking about someone who's 85, 86, 87, sitting, listening, learning, and taking notes. So I continually am impressed and very grateful to have him as a friend. So there are so many others, Rick. I mean, I think Sir John Hegarty, who was the H in BBH in the UK, really, really tremendous. I was very lucky to be on the board. I'm back on now with a different regime at the VCU Brand Center, which is the premier graduate program for advertising and media in the country, part of Virginia Commonwealth University. And that first iteration of the board had people like Bob Greenberg, the founder of RGA. Bob was in digital in the 80s before anybody really knew what it was. And RGA, there was a moment in time where no one could touch them in terms of their embrace and understanding of where the world was going, blending creativity, technology, media, all in that same soup pot. So Bob Greenberg would be another. My friend John Kamen, who's still working, the founder and chair of Radical Media on the commercial production side. But John is a quintessential storyteller. So he is partners with Questlove, and they won the Academy Award for Summer of Soul. They just did Sly Lives about Sly Stone, which is on Hulu now. Tremendous film, Sly Stone. No Prince without Sly Stone. So I think the great storytellers, Rick, are the people who I really have grown to admire. A lot of characters in the business, I've dealt with over the years, a lot of memorable meetings, a lot of people who were a little off kilter, a very memorable, series of things I did with Steve Stout, translation, who's a really interesting guy. A lot of characters, a lot of personalities. And one of the things that I hope we'll continue to see that I worry about is those personalities, the people that think differently, to continue to be able to thrive. And probably lastly, Crispin Porter Bogusky, also had a moment in time where they were, by far the most respected and groundbreaking creative agency. Chuck Porter, who's still around, remains a dear friend. Chuck was really more on the business side. Alex Bogusky, brilliant
Great
creative.
creative.
And
Yep.
we put Alex and Lee Clow on stage together on a Broadway theater. I think it was the set of the Lion King or another theater? And that was really interesting to put the two of them together way back when. So lots of great folks in Japan, Rei Inamoto, brilliant people all over the world. So that's been one
Well,
of
it's
the
interesting
joys.
because as you expanded Adweek to other places, I think it gave you a unique view of the world. I've always said none of us see the world as it is. We only see the world as we are. And you can get very myopic. Again, you grew up in Long Island, you've been in New York. I laugh at a lot of the New Yorkers that honestly really believe the sun rises over the East River and sets over the Hudson and the rest of the world doesn't exist. But your ability to go to Australia, to go to South Africa, to go to London, to go to Japan, talk about how that kind of changed your worldview and how this really is a very, very small planet.
Yeah, well, it speaks to the insanity of where we are today with this whole notion of America first, because America is part of the fabric of a global community. And all of us, irrespective of political views, beliefs, this is not a right or a left thing. We're all on the same planet together. We're all in this together. We can do whatever we want here to roll back, Environmental Protection Agency rules that are designed to keep us healthy and alive. But the air connects everywhere. It doesn't stop in Maine or San Diego or anywhere in between. So I think a lot of the challenges that we see here are mirrored around the world, as are a lot of the opportunities. What difference we see is how we respond to things. So we had another terrible shooting incident in New York a few days ago, somebody with an AR-15. Australia had a mass shooting incident. It's got to be now, Rick, 30, 35 years ago. It was in a mall. I want to say Melbourne. I'm not sure. I don't remember. But there was a mass shooting incident in Australia, give or take 3 decades ago. And they made a decision and said, this is not going to happen here again. And they changed the laws. People can still own guns legally, as the framers back in the 1700s wrote, a citizen's right to bear arms. No one's talking about taking your pistol away if you want to go trap and skeet shooting or hunting. I'm not a hunter, but, people can certainly choose to do that if they like. But nowhere did it say in the Constitution, in the Second Amendment, that citizens have a right to weapons of war. And Australia changed their policy, and they have not had an incident like that since. So what you see are different approaches to problems and solutions. And you see common issues that bind us all. Everybody always sort of thinks somebody's smarter somewhere else. I don't really think that's true. I think everybody is united by looking for the way forward. And what we tried to provide, with the thought leadership program that we did, uniting best and brightest from around the world, was sort of present that pathway forward and allow people in one part of the world to hear people they don't normally get to see or hear or listen to and learn from. So when we brought Jeff Goodby, another icon on the creative side who's still really throwing his fastball, at 100 miles an hour after all these years. When we brought Jeff to Sydney, they really love that. So I think more common than things that differentiate us, and fascinating, though, to see all the different perspectives and learn from people all over the world and create friendships all over the world.
We're talking about the Goodwill Games. In December of 92, I was asked to speak at a conference on sponsorship in Monaco. And our mutual friend, Jack Kelly, who was involved with the Goodwill Games at the time, was also a speaker. And we were going to come home, and Charlotte was with me, and he said, let's take a train and go to Lillehammer and see how they're coming with their plans for the games that were about 13 months away. This is December of 92, like maybe December the 12th or 13th. And I remember getting on the train in Oslo to go to Lillehammer and picking up a Norwegian newspaper, and they had had their third murder of the year in the country.
Yeah.
And they were outraged.
Yeah.
We would have 3 murders at Grady in Atlanta on Friday night. I mean, and so it's weird how somehow along the way, and you and I have talked about this before, but we've become numb. We have lost our outrage. We've lost our outrage about poverty. We've lost our outrage about guns. We've lost our outrage about mistreatment of people. Where did that happen, and why did that happen?
Yeah, that's a good tough one. And the gun thing is uniquely American. You know, everyone around the world, and you do get the benefit of global perspective when you travel as much, or you and I have had. Nobody gets it. We have failed our people. And, you know, I'm sure that there are political leaders in the last 24 to 48 hours since the latest shooting in New York. And a number of friends of mine know the young lady, the 27-year-old girl that was killed. Her funeral is this morning. You'll hear the requisite thoughts and prayers. What you don't hear or don't see is action to limit access to those types of weapons. Listen, I do think that to a large degree, digital media, which really shines the lens on self. So where human satisfaction comes from, and I'm not a scientist, but we all know about the science of likes and dopamine, and, you know, used to be you'd get a rush from exercise, and you would feel your body mind connection from moving your body. The most common manifestation of that was if you're moving around and if you're exercising. Now the dopamine hit comes to your brain from a like on a phone, a like on a post. And I think that has pointed the lens inward to self. And what we as a society are losing is the understanding that, you know, it's an old Nelson Mandela proverb, really, Rick, about the way that you find satisfaction is by filling up the cups of others, not by filling up your own cup. And we do not have leadership in this country now that lives and breathes that. We have examples of it. I think the Global Citizens event in New York, UN Week in Central Park every year, you know, I think that is a heart in the right place thing. You know, sort of waiting for the music activism. You know, people like Bruce Springsteen have already spoken out about what's going on in America. I think he really represents in so many ways the best of us. But I do think that that pendulum of pushback is very, very important. I think a lot of people who are rational are sort of hoping for that, don't see it coming from the current leadership. And by the way, we've had great Republican leaders. So this is not a Democrat or a Republican thing. And I'm a Democrat, but I voted for Republicans. We used to vote for Al D'Amato, the senator who was, you know, from New York. Al was a crook. We kind of all knew he was a crook, but he was our crook. And Al brought home the bacon, you know, for New York. So I think leadership and understanding that by lifting up other people is how we lift our entire self up, as opposed to just trying to accumulate more for me. That's where the problem is.
You know, our generation, Matt, we were very idealistic early on. And then somewhere along the line of making a living, being successful, raising families, doing the things we did, we kind of lost some of that. I still think there's a chance for baby boomers now with more resources, more talent, more wisdom, more time to have an impact. You know, can we have one more movement of our generation that leaves something of a legacy We've talked about this. I got 3 grand boys now. That changes your perspective. I'm thinking about what is 50 years? I'll be gone, but what have I left behind in the world for them? And that's I'm not saying it keeps me up at night, but it dominates a lot of my thinking of, am I going to do something that they're going to look back and go, hey, I'm proud of the stand that in my case, my big daddy took.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about our ability to harness something with our generation.
I'll answer 2 ways. I agree with you, and I also think to some degree our generation has bungled it. I think there's a lot that we bring to the table. And the value of people, was born 1964, so I'm the last year of the baby boomers.
Yep.
And I think the value of people that have been around is tremendous and often underestimated. But I do think that what has happened here has happened under our watch.
Our watch.
And what will determine the future is that next generation. And that's where I hope that young leadership will emerge. We need elected officials and people running the world, public or private, who are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, not in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And we need that generational transition to happen. Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, New Yorker, been in office forever, ineffective, to say the least. It's enough. Let's get somebody else in that seat. And the absence of term limits, I think, is also very much goes against. And, part of the problem today, public and private, is the amount of digital-driven scrutiny that everybody's under. And a lot of people don't want that scrutiny, So it's a little different world now where, our president can do, if he's done half the things that he's accused of, juxtapose that against Gary Hart, who got in all kinds of trouble for a photo on a ironic
monkey business
named Monkey Business, with a girl sitting on his knee.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that was that he should get a pass or anything like that, or John Edwards being, some reporter chasing him and a gal. I guess he had gotten pregnant in a hotel room somewhere, but in relative terms, those were minor crimes.
Yeah.
And, we've come a long way from that to no problem accepting a $400 million jet from the Qataris for, with no quid pro quo or expectation of anything coming back. Anybody knows that if you get a gift that's worth $400 million, and by the way, the reason why all those airplanes have been taken out of the sky is because they are wildly inefficient and wildly expensive to operate. So what has not been reported widely is the Qataris were trying to get rid of these planes for years, couldn't find anybody who would buy them, said, oh, here's someone who will take it as a glorious gift. And in effect, we will own this bitch now going forward. And that's reality. That's not Democratic. Yeah. That's not Republican. I give you something, Rick, worth $400 million. The next time I call you for a favor, you're going to say yes, no matter what it is. That's just how the world works.
I think I kind of remembered that scene with Marlon Brando in The Godfather, where basically
someday I may call upon you.
Yeah. And here's the deal. You knew someday was going to be one day.
Enzo the baker.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. It's that kind of thing. Well, listen, I'm going to need to let you go, but I know you're working on something you can't talk about right now, but next year in our second season of Shaboom, you'll be ready to talk about it, because I know you got one more big idea out there that's percolating in your mind, and I want to bring you back to talk about that.
We'll keep going and growing, not retiring yet, buddy.
That's right. You're going to be like Keith. You're going to take your notepad and continue to take notes. So, hey, this has been fun. I love you. I appreciate you. And thanks for being with us today on Shaboom.
Anytime, pal.
All right. See you, pal. There's a great song about climate change. And that song is the classic song by Marvin Gaye called Mercy, Mercy Me. And you'll find it today on our playlist. It's time to take a trip down memory lane. We're talking about advertising today. If you wanted to sell beer traditionally, you were aiming to motivate males in their 20s. In many cases, you may be wanting to motivate males in their teens who were not legally allowed to drink beer but started drinking beer. And so how did you reach young males? You usually reached them with sports or with guys hanging out with dudes doing crazy things, or better yet, guys hanging out with gorgeous girls. Usually in beer commercials, gorgeous girls in really small bathing suits, right? And then right in the middle of that sea of the same comes Dos Equis. And they take an older baby boomer and they call him the most interesting man in the world. Remember that ad campaign? An old guy that young guys wanted to grow up to be like that guy. And so the ads are about him reliving his youth, you know, when he ran with the Bulls and when he met queens and when he, flew the Concorde and all the things that he had done in his youth. But this old man became the most interesting man in the world. I found it to be a fascinating ad campaign on memory lane. It's now time for the boom. I'm going to use two phrases now, and let's see if they make sense or go together. First phrase, climate change. Second phrase, common sense. They don't seem to go together, do they? Have we lost our minds about clean and renewable energy? Yes, we have. See, the problem is this. We can get there, but you can't get there throwing out the old. If you have not watched the television show Landman on Netflix, you need to watch it. This is Billy Bob Thornton. He plays an oil man. And it's the greatest testimony to our dependency on oil in America. We cannot put the toothpaste back in the tube, y'all. We depend on fossil fuels for everything, for the makeup you wear, for the asphalt you drive on, for your cars, for everything. Most of our electricity is created from fossil fuels. Do you know how many fossil fuels or how much it costs to build wind turbines? We cannot stop drilling and fracking because we then become dependent upon the Middle East. What is all this bullshit in the Middle East really about? What is Iran and Israel and Iraq? What is it all about? Oil, period. We're junkies. We consume more oil than anybody on the planet. We're going to continue to do that. We have plenty of oil in America. Let's get it out safely, cleanly, and at the same time, let's invest in renewable energy. I just saw this week where New York State, what I consider to be the second most liberal state in the union, just announced their governor a new nuclear plant. Because nuclear energy, believe it or not, is clean energy. It's scary if something goes wrong, but it's clean. We can do both, and that's the boom. I do have another song about climate change or about the environment. It's an old song by Joni Mitchell called Big Little Taxi. You may remember the tagline, "They paved paradise and put up a parking lot." You can listen to that on our playlist today. It's time to get back on the road with Rick. I love trains. As a kid, I loved trains. I had a great uncle, Leonard Mills. He was a conductor on a train. I thought that was the most romantic thing in the world. I used to love to hear the sound of trains at night, the whistle. Well, in 1983, which seems like forever ago, I rode a train from Atlanta, Georgia to Miami, to Hialeah train station in Miami, and I took my bicycle. And I got off the train with my bicycle, and I rode my bike from that train station all the way to Key West. And when I got to Key West, I stayed in a Days Inn. Remember Days Inn? Cheapest room I could find. And I fished every day. And the way I fished was I didn't pay a dime to fish. I would go down to where the boats were leaving with charters, and I would count the number of people on the boat. You could take 6 people on a boat. I would count. If there were 4 or 5, I would quickly come to the captain and say, I don't have the money to pay you, but you're short. I'll help you as a deckhand. I'll let you keep all the fish I catch because I'm staying in a hotel room. And every day I got to fish for free for dolphin, mahi, all sorts of fish. Had a wonderful time. And what did I eat every night when I was in Key West? Cuban food. I mean, you're only 90 miles from Havana in Key West, and I love Cuban food. Well, there's a wonderful restaurant down there that was there then and is still there today. It's called El Siboney, family-owned, amazing Cuban food. Now, look, you can get the traditional, ropa villa or pork dishes and all that. You don't want to do that. You want to eat nothing but seafood, garlic shrimp, grilled mahi, grilled grouper, have beans and rice with it. Add a few plantains, maybe start with some conch chowder and wash it all down with sangria. Key West, Florida, El Siboney on the road with Rick. It's time for the song of the week. Let's have a song about trains. I've taken so many memorable train trips, but one of them, I actually took a trip on a train with my wife Charlotte one year from Atlanta to New Orleans. There's a classic song about a train to New Orleans. Steve Goodman wrote a song called The City of New Orleans. We'll listen to the famous version by Arlo Guthrie today on the playlist. It's time to wine and wine. Let's keep talking about trains. I lived in Europe for a while. The trains in Europe are amazing. Now, a funny thing happened. We had great trains in America. We really did. We had great passenger trains. They were connecting all the cities, did everything. But General Eisenhower, as he fought the Second World War, once he got to Germany and saw the German Autobahns, he fell in love with the interstate highway system. And when General Eisenhower became President Eisenhower in 1952, he decided to fund interstate highways. The interstate highways. And we have the best interstate highways in the world, but it came at the demise of the trains. People don't take passenger trains anymore, and that's kind of a shame. Well, if you want to ride great trains in Europe, ride the ones in Italy. Number one, the scenery's phenomenal. But number two, that you get really good wine on the train. I mean, like, really good wine on the train. And one of my favorite wines comes from the area called Valpolicella. And Valpolicella wines are wonderful red wines. And you should have that today and drink a red wine from Valpolicella. Here's my wine. We're missing out in America on international tourism. I read the other day that Italy's GDP is almost 20%. Somebody wrote it was 12%. I saw another article that said it's nearly 20% in tourism. Ours is right around 7% of GDP. Now, people think you come to America and get shot. That's one of the reasons. I mean, obviously our gun issues, people are afraid to come here. But we got a great opportunity coming up. We've got a World Cup next year. We have our 250th birthday next year. We have an Olympic Games in 2028. It's time to promote America to the rest of the world as a great place to visit. And that's the wine today. It's time for the last word. Lady Bird Johnson, Lyndon Johnson's wife, was famous for planting wildflowers. If you drive down interstate highways today or U.S. highways today and you see on the roadside millions and millions of wildflowers, think one woman, Lady Bird Johnson. And in Austin, Texas, there's a wonderful Lady Bird Johnson wildflower park and you can buy seeds, and it's a fascinating place. But this is what Lady Bird Johnson once said about the environment. She said, the environment is where we all meet, where we all have mutual interest. It's the one thing all of us share. My question to you today is, are you planting any flowers? David Brower is an environmentalist and a rock climber, and he said it, I think, even better. He said, we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. And that's my last word. Let's close today with a kind of a peaceful song, kind of a song of lament, but a song of beauty and lament at the same time. There was a wonderful African-American artist from Macon, Georgia, named Otis Redding. And Otis Redding, unfortunately, died tragically in a plane crash. And 2 weeks after he died, they released his last single. It's called Sitting on the Dock of the Bay. I want to thank Matt for being our guest today, and we'll see you next week on Shaboom.